I am so excited to introduce you to Claire from the Inspired Treehouse. Claire, we have known each other, I want to say like over a decade.
I was
We,
gonna say 10 years. I
yeah,
think
about 10
so.
years. We both started our websites about the same time, and we've been on this journey together. Now, Claire, I think it was probably 8 or 9 years ago where you wrote an article about the therapeutic benefits of yoga in your OT practice because you're an OT and your partner Lauren is a PT. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yes, and I wrote something for you both about jungle yoga on your website. So we've been in each other's world a long
Totally.
time, but this is the first time we're meeting in person. So I'm really excited to share all your expertise. And today, what we're going to talk about is those three lesser known sensory systems. And why this is so important is because when I took teacher education many, many years ago, we dabbled in sensory, understanding sensory issues, but I think it's really come to the forefront, right? My daughter used to go to an OT a couple of years ago, so I'm learning more about it myself. So let's start with your background. Tell us a little bit about your job as an OT and your work with the Inspired Treehouse and your developmental play clinic. And
Sure.
let's catch everyone up to what you're up to.
Okay, yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I'm an occupational therapist. I started my practice in the school systems 18 years ago. And I met my now business partner, Lauren, who's a physical therapist. We were working together in the same school. And we really just kind of had a similar mindset, kind of entrepreneurial, wanted to do something outside of our school work and started the Inspired Treehouse as an online resource for therapists, teachers, other professionals, as well as parents with all kinds of information about child development. So we really try to cover every skill you can think of, all different kinds of activities to support different developmental skills and other resources, tons of printables and handouts and things like that. And then, so that has gone very well for us. We've been so excited about the success of that business. And in 2017, we decided that we wanted to kind of come back around full circle to sort of take the things that were online on our website and bring them to life in an actual physical space. So we started our nonprofit organization, which is called the Treehouse here in Cleveland. And we offer developmental play groups for kids. So not quite a traditional therapy clinic. We don't do evaluations and progress monitoring and those things that you might see in a pediatric therapy clinic, but we do all kinds of developmental skill building through play. So kids come in for our play groups each week and we do social skill building, motor skill building, cognitive skills, language, you name it, all within these social play groups.
Oh, that's so important. And can you describe the difference between occupational therapist and a physical therapist? Because
Sure.
that's always tricky to really understand what each person does, what each therapist does.
Definitely. And I will say, especially the way Lauren and I work, we've been working together for so long that there's so much crossover. And
Yes.
so to say like, this is what this person does and this what this person does, you'll get people that are like, no, that's not true because PTs and OTs tend to be kind of whole body therapists, which means we kind of tackle each other's territory from time to time. But physical therapists in general are focused more on whole body movements, gross motor skills,
Mhm.
positioning, ambulation and navigation, things like that. Whereas
Mhm.
occupational therapists may be more focused on fine motor skills. We tend to have a stronger focus on sensory processing, which we'll talk about today.
Yeah.
And also those adaptive skills like activities of daily living and things like that tend to fall within the realm of OT. But again, lots of crossover between the two,
Right.
depending on what setting.
And I feel like with my daughter, the OT she worked with was really focused on self-regulation and managing your emotions, identifying your emotions. So it was more of an emotional management
Yes.
system for
I
her.
would totally agree with that. And that's
Yeah.
definitely the history of occupational therapy is kind of where OT got its start in mental health. So it makes good sense that those little threads have kind of carried through.
Mhm. So why is it, and especially in these days, Claire, why is it important for us to know as teachers, parents, caregivers, to understand the different sensory systems? So we're going to talk about the three lesser known, but thinking about, the smell, taste, auditory, our learning styles also, but why is it important for us to know all these sensory systems?
Yeah, so when we hear about sensory integration or sensory processing, we really mean exactly what you're saying. How all of those senses from all of the different systems come together to create really what becomes like our human experience. It's how we experience the world around us. And that has such a strong impact on our interactions with other people in our lives, on our behavior and the way we show up in the world, because we're so heavily impacted by those things in our surroundings and how our body interprets and responds to them. And I think it's so important when we're working with kids to have this kind of understanding, because it really, for me, and I think for a lot of teachers and other professionals, it can help kind of break down some of the frustrations we might feel, because a lot of times these responses and reactions show up as challenging behavior. And so
Mhm.
when we have a better understanding of maybe where these things are originating from, it can kind of break down some of that frustration. And I think most importantly, once we know about these aspects of sensory processing, we can really use them to our benefit as professionals to build deeper connections with kids, to kind of develop that
Mm.
sense of trust, and really form those relationships that I think are like the foundation for the learning and growth and skill building we want for the kids in the first place. So I think once we have that in place, it's a really strong foundation for everything else we want to do.
Right. I think that's the thing, Claire, too, that we hear about this around on the internet or with other of our colleagues or other parents, but it's really minding that gap between what we hear and actually put it into practical application. And what I love about your website, and I'm pretty sure you have a book, you two wrote a book,
Do.
right? About sensory processing, so that it's the bringing that gap together to make it more accessible and to make
Mhm.
it ultimately so we can understand our children better. It's like we're peeling the onion, right, to know our children better. And so now versus when we were growing up, right, we didn't have a lot of focus on sensory systems. So thinking about what you just said, we're just understanding ourselves as humans and us as adults as well, right? Understanding our own sensory preferences, right? That's going to make a
Yep.
difference in how we respond to our children, whether we have children who have similar sensory differences or preferences than we do or different, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Don't you think? Yeah.
Agreed. And I think it's as much as we're saying we can understand our children better, you're right. We can understand ourselves better and our responses, we're
Right.
showing up with all of these things too. And to kind of normalize that everybody
Right.
has preferences and everybody has kind of aversions to certain types of sensory input. And to know that about ourselves also helps us in those interactions, because, we all have, like, I have the things as a parent or as a therapist where like loud sounds really are triggering for me. And I know that about myself. So I have to like kind of, I navigate my interactions with kids differently because I need a break, or I need, to structure
Right.
things in a certain way where I'm not having that input that's triggering for me.
Right. And don't you find it's a little bit of a dance because having a child who has additional needs, I always try to find the balance of, we can do hard things and I know you can do this, and being super empathetic for her preferences, but and so not being too accommodating, but sort of finding that middle ground. Do you find that too with some of your
Yes. That's
the
a
students,
great way
right?
to put it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it is because we want to have first and foremost this respect
Mm.
for kids who are really struggling with these sensory input, different types of inputs, and to really build that kind of rapport and relationship that you need in a therapeutic sense. You have to show that you understand those things. You have to connect with that and you have to respect it. But
Yeah.
also, yeah, there are also, knowing that in practical life, in real life, there are going to be times where these things come up and we have to have the coping mechanisms and we have to have the ability the strategies in place to know what to do when we're feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated.
Right, exactly. Look, that good point about the noise. I'm finding that more so as I get older, I feel like that I can't handle the noise, but I have to be able to handle the noise when
Right.
I want to go traveling or, to a concert or something. So it's always about that balance, right? That
Yes.
you can sometimes I can choose to be in quiet, but then when I'm working in a school, I don't get to choose how the children's behaviors are that day, but it's in my response. And I know
Yes.
to take little breaks and we can teach our children that too, right? So
Yep.
let's
Agreed.
dive deeper into these three lesser known sensory
Okay.
systems. This is the best part. And maybe talk about how do we cater to those three in particular?
Sure. So we have the three that no one ever talks about in school, right? You have your five senses and you learn about those. And then I think these three are actually the ones that maybe matter the most, or the ones that show
Mm.
up as the most visible, um, challenging things that we might see as teachers and therapists and other professionals and parents as well. The first one we have is the proprioceptive system. And this is just the system is the way that our joints and muscles send messages to our brain, and it helps coordinate our movements. And the receptors send signals when our muscles and joints compress and stretch. So if you think of activities like jumping and stomping, crashing, crashing into cushions or crashing on the bed, pushing and pulling against something heavy, anything where you're working against resistance, those are all proprioceptive activities. And we may see, just as a side note, for kids who may crave more proprioceptive input, you may see that in different settings as a child who appears to be very rough. They might be kind of always pushing into things or pushing into other kids. And it may appear that it's a behavior concern when really their bodies are actually seeking out more of this kind of input. And you may have heard of heavy work activities
I was
as
going to
another.
say that's the
Yeah.
heavy work. Yeah, right.
And these are
Yeah.
proprioceptive activities, again, where the child's working against resistance, pushing or pulling something heavy, carrying something heavy. And oftentimes those types of activities, if we can structure them in the right way, can really work to help calm and ground kids who are feeling disorganized and dysregulated, and are seeking out that proprioceptive input.
Yeah, right.
And then we have the vestibular system. So
Well,
another,
before we go on, so back to that one, I was just thinking yesterday, my daughter started jujitsu, and
Okay.
she was kicking against one of those big, what are they called? The hanging doo-woppies,
Oh yeah, the
the
punching bag.
weight bags, the punching
Weight
bag.
bag.
Yeah. So she was punching and kicking. Is that kind of like proprioceptive too?
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah.
Anything where
Okay.
you're getting that really strong, like heavy impact,
Right.
kicking, stomping, jumping.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Great
Great. And like,
example.
if you're at home, for example, get your kiddo, bring in the garbage bins or bring in the
Yes.
wood, or, to do
Yes.
that more heavy lifting, or even do some push-ups, right?
Yep. Pushing on
And
the wall. We act like we're going to push the wall down, or we'll have
yeah,
them carry the couch cushions around and build something with the couch cushions,
right,
things like that. Anything that where they're working against that resistance or lifting something heavy, or again, that pounding, jumping, kind of crashing stuff can really give kids the input that they need if they're craving this type of sensory
right.
experience.
And so then in schools, right? Because I know you're both in schools as well. So that could be about like doing a plank against a
Yep.
wall if you've got a sensory pathway, or if there's a OTPT room, right? You're going to have some things that you can work with lifting,
Yep.
or
We
in
used to.
the gym's empty, that kind
Yes,
of thing.
perfect. Like wherever you can find an open space. We would have the kids lined up for the bathroom or whatever, and we would put handprints on the wall or
Right.
just a line of tape on the wall. And so they would do their push-ups on the handprints, and then they would pretend to sit down on the tape chair. So they would put their backs against the wall and sit
Yes.
down as low as they can, like they're
Oh, I
holding the
love that.
wall up. So those
Yeah,
are
yeah.
two quick and easy proprioceptive activities that
Right.
really. And these are great for kids who are seeking this kind of input and kids that have diagnosed sensory concerns, but really they're also sort of fun, playful activities for any
Yeah.
kid. None of these things would be like harmful. You couldn't do
Yes.
too much of it with a child that isn't necessarily seeking out that kind of input. So it's sort of
Right.
just fun.
I love the chair sit, because when you're in transition from outdoors, whatever, indoors, coming from
Mhm.
recess, waiting for a special class, you could have all the kiddos do a chair sit. And
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that.
it's a fun and easy one. You don't need
Oh,
anything, no equipment needed.
yeah. Okay, great. So the second one?
Okay, so the second one is a vestibular system, and this is another movement sense. And this one is a little different in that it has to do with our perception of our body in space. So we have this fluid inside the vestibular organs in our inner ear. And when we move our
Mm,
heads, the fluid in these organs moves and shifts. And that is what provides our brain with information about where we are in space. Am I leaning to the side? Am I upside down? Am I going to
mm,
fall? That's the balance system. It has a lot to do with our sense of balance and coordination. It allows us to navigate obstacles, things like stairs. It's really, it comes into play. And again, anytime we're moving positions, walking, driving, those things where you have this sense of moving in space, that's your vestibular system. And we also can see that we have some kids who seek out this kind of sensory experience more than others. And in these cases, you might see kids who like to spin.
I
We
was
see
going to
this a
say
lot
spinning.
if you're in
Right.
an open space and that's the first thing that they
Yes.
do. So they may be seeking that kind of input out or just swaying, rocking in their
Hmm.
seat, having a hard time staying in their seat throughout the day, like just needing to be up a lot. Kids who love to swing, things like that are related
Right.
to the vestibular sense.
Right.
And typically, just another little side note about kind of when we're thinking about giving input to kids in these ways, when we think of linear and rhythmic and repetitive and predictable
Mm,
movements,
right.
these tend to be more calming types of vestibular input for kids, whereas rotary, like that spinning, more unpredictable, spontaneous movement tends to be more alerting. So if we have a child
Right.
who's slumped over and falling asleep and they're looking like disengaged with what you're doing, maybe in the classroom or in therapy, we can kind of use that to our advantage, right? Can we get them up on a therapy ball and bounce and then stop and then bounce and then stop, like just to kind of wake that sensory system up versus
Right.
a child who can't sit still and is maybe running around and you can't gather them to do the activity. Can we provide some of
Mm,
that calming, more rhythmic, linear movement for the
yeah.
opposite effect?
I love that. I was thinking the other day, I was working in a fourth grade classroom, and right before they were doing a test, we did like a Simon Says for those reasons, do the movement. We did like a spinning and a hanging upside down and like a stomping. And I can see that. Yeah, I was hoping to help them rejig their mind so they could
Yep.
then focus, right? Is that kind of the same thing?
Perfect. Yeah, you're just
Yeah.
really like waking the body up. It's a great like
Yeah.
pathway to that alerting input or calming input. And it's very strong. These movement senses are very strong. So a little goes a
Mhm.
long way, and I think that this is another reason this is so important, because if we can have a handle on these things, one
Yeah.
quick little thing like that Simon Says game can make a really big difference.
Right. Yeah, and I can see too that often we see when we see children who can't sit still, right? And if you're not sort of familiar with what's going on under the surface for them, it can be often children who just can't honestly be in their own body, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
inside they might be white knuckling or their anxiety or whatever else, but there's usually a lot more going on with the
Yes.
story than just they can't sit still, right? And so providing that spinning or some other input that way can really help them to to be able to sit and focus, right?
Definitely. Yes, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, great. Okay, and then the third one.
Okay, and then the third one, and this is probably the least understood and the least known sensory system, is called interoception. And this sensory system is our perception of what's going on inside of our bodies. And so it's like the feelings of
Mm,
hunger, tiredness, sickness,
mm,
nausea. If you have to go to the bathroom, all of those things
mm,
are like these built-in internal signals and internal cues inside our bodies, and it goes even deeper than just those physical sensations, because interoception is associated with our sense of well-being. So it's answering the question like, am I okay? Like, am I safe? Am I okay?
right.
And that plays a huge part in emotional regulation. So, and we can see differences in this system too. So we can see kids who may be hypersensitive to those internal signals. And in that case, they may show extreme responses when they are hungry, or,
Mm,
they might show extreme responses when they feel like they have to go to the bathroom, and it can trigger a lot of anxiety. It can feel even to the point of feeling painful and extremely uncomfortable to
mm,
the child, versus a child who maybe has decreased sensitivity in this area. And this would be a child who doesn't have the feeling of having to go to the bathroom, never feels the feeling of hunger. So you have to kind of always remind oh my gosh, you've gone all day without eating lunch. And they may never speak up and tell you because they have sort
mm.
of a decreased awareness of those signals that are going on inside. So that's a really
Gosh.
important one, I think, for teachers, for yoga teachers out there,
Mm,
because it has so much to do with that mindfulness and awareness and
yeah.
slowing down enough to check in and recognize those cues. And even like kids don't know how to describe them sometimes. So giving
Mm.
the language to help kind of explain what are you feeling and what's going on and what does it mean?
Oh my gosh, Claire, just like my mind's blown. I actually have never heard of that before.
Okay,
And
yeah,
that
I
just
think most
makes
people.
right, makes so much sense. I could tell you there's like stories going through my head that I think as teachers and parents and caregivers, we make an assumption that children are born with that, right?
Yes.
That they have a sense of self. But I remember my daughter was like 5. She had a fractured arm and she really just didn't know. There's like a disconnect. Or in the
Yeah.
wintertime, she wears shorts. She can't feel that her
Hmm.
legs are cold, right? Or even just tuning in, as you say. So that's where the yoga and mindfulness is so powerful, is because our kids, especially now, are so externally stimulated, right? With
Yes.
screen and all these other things and overscheduling, they don't get time to be quiet, right? And so they don't have those moments. I was reading the book by Dan Siegel, not the whole brain child, Brainstorm.
Mm.
And he talks about, how we have the plate for vegetables and proteins, whatever and he's got one for a mind plate. And
Oh,
there's
I
all these
love that.
different, so sleep and exercise and all that. And one of them was tuning in, and I was showing my daughter the book I was reading, and she said, I do all of those, but I don't do that. so,
Right. And most
so
of
it,
us, right? Yeah.
right. It's not, it's something that, that I don't know why we don't know about this. Why isn't it more well known?
Yeah.
Right. That's,
I don't know. And I think, as you said, like as time has gone on and we've gained a better understanding of these systems, it's
mm,
coming to the forefront more. And hopefully, even more so as time goes on, that the more
right.
understanding we have, the better we can do for kids. And again, for ourselves, right? Even
Yes.
ourselves slowing down and recognizing. I do it all the time.
Absolutely.
I've been working all day and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 3 o'clock and I haven't had any water or I haven't had anything to eat,
Yes.
right?
Right. And it all starts with us, doesn't it, Claire? I
Yes.
mean, it has to start with us. We have to look after our internal gauge, right? And
Yes.
we start our day, maybe even if we have no time, because I get it. We're all often, a lot of us have families as well,
Right.
or younger, or looking after older parents, or whatever's going on, that we need to stop and look after ourselves. I
Yes.
mean, before we can look after others, right? So
Yeah.
important.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
it's great. So tell us a story about maybe something that happened in your developmental play clinic, or working with one of your students, or something that you use, maybe one of these lesser known sensory system, and sort of what happened. And
Sure. I
we
have a
can go
great
there.
one. Actually, we had a child who came to us who was really appearing to just have difficulty engaging with the activities, engaging with the other kids, just kind of on the outskirts of things, kind of looking
Mm,
like he was in his own world, just sort of off to himself. And when we would try to engage, he really would back away. He didn't want to see what we were doing. He wasn't curious about what we were doing.
mm,
And so we really just started to sit back and observe his independent play and what he was doing, and started kind of noticing the sensory qualities of the play that he was doing.
mm,
And so he really gravitated toward what we're talking about today, those proprioceptive and vestibular experiences, jumping, swaying, spinning, rocking. And so we started to think about, like, hey, if we're going to grab on and get him, to have some kind of connection with us, because we wanted to get to know him,
mm,
we were like
right.
really curious about what was going on and what he could do. And we started just building those kinds of experiences into the activities that we were doing. So we would go to him and see that he was laying on the floor and kind of sliding his head back and forth. So we would grab onto his feet. We would play mop the floor. We have like this big
Right.
hardwood floor in there. And so we would
Right.
drag him around and pretend like we were mopping. And all of a sudden we just noticed like the lights just shining in him, his
Oh,
personality coming out more. He was
yes.
making more eye contact and vocalizing more, asking us for more and signing more.
Right.
And then it was also a way that we could kind of hook into the other kids too, because you see one kid mopping the floor. Well, now everybody everybody wants a turn.
Yes.
So
Right.
it was so great to be able to bring him into that and, say, okay, your turn is done. Now it's so and so's turn. And then he would wait and watch and engage. So he was there with the kids and really building
Right.
that connection and that anticipation of wanting another turn. So
Right.
I think building those things into the play went a really long way for him.
Yeah, I love that story, because what you did is, again, what we're talking about is you watched to see what his preferences were, and you met him where he's at. I mean,
Yes.
why not? Right?
Right.
I think that, again, that thinking about that middle ground is, yes, we can take our time to get to know children, and yes, we can accommodate them, and yes, we can bring in their preferences, and the other children benefit as well, right? And he
Yes.
still had to, even when it wasn't his turn, there's so much going on there with his own regulation, right? He's having to wait his turn,
Right.
and to watch the others. There's a lot more going on there too, but you hooked him in with something that he's interested in. I love that. What a
Yeah,
great story.
exactly. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was one of my favorites. And he was a fun one too, because you could see that he kind of intuitively knew what he needed. So he was really
Yes.
very visibly acting out in his play what his body was craving. And so it was so great to like put those pieces together that way.
Right. That happens, like you said, in our kids' yoga classes as well, right? Is understanding, looking for those. sensory differences and preferences and be able to incorporate that into the whole body experience in gross motor in terms of yoga postures, but also in the mindfulness piece as well, right? Is being able to
Yes.
tune in. Yeah. So what advice would you say to teachers and yoga teachers who are looking, who really want to be sensory sensitive with their children, but really, don't have a lot of confidence or don't really understand it, or maybe don't have extra time on their plate to plan for it, or maybe they just feel overwhelmed with like, what resources or what props do I need?
Yeah, I think it can feel overwhelming, and like the lingo sometimes feels like, oh,
Mhm.
I don't know what that is, or I'm
Right,
not
right.
an expert or something. And I think to remember that it really doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't require a lot
Mhm.
of like equipment and know-how, just the base, knowing these basic things. And I think most often as teachers, you naturally are watching your kids and getting to know them and really just looking closely at each child and figuring out what they need and what kind of, how can you either join what they're doing if they're already, going down a road and playing in a certain way. Can you join with that? Or can you take what they're doing? Because we all also, you have to teach too, right? I'm so now
Yeah,
like understanding of teachers who are, bound by these things that they have to get done in the classroom every day. And so for us to come in and say, do all these sensory things, it's
right,
not
right.
helpful. But to know that you can kind of take those little nuggets that you see, oh, that child really likes to do this. How can I create a learning activity that embeds that kind of sensory experience into it? I think that's kind of the ticket, so that you're still achieving the objectives that you need
Mm,
to, but also appealing to the kids' needs. And honestly, I think like it sort of feels like adding another thing to your plate, but I think the benefits are so
yeah,
great that if we prioritize that and this type of understanding and connection, we really do have a better chance of achieving our goals of teaching and getting the children, engaged and building those relationships and everything that we set out to do.
yeah. I love that. And even like you talked about transition, like it doesn't have to take long. Even if when they're sitting, if they've been sitting for a while in the classroom, you could do the push and pull with your chair. You
Yes.
can just be doing that, pushing and pulling, and then taking 3 deep breaths, right? And that
Yes.
will help them to rejig, have that sensory input, and so they can transition to the next activity. Yeah, so
Yes.
true. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell us, where can we find you online? Where can we get all your products and your books and all that kind of
Sure.
thing? And what's next for you both?
Yeah, sure. So you can find everything. Our kind of hub is the inspiredtreehouse.com. And from there, you can find all of our products in our shop and all of our free materials as well. And our social media, we're really active on Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest. So if you're active on those platforms, you can find us in all those places. And then as far as what's next, just kind of more of the same. I think we're looking at growing our capacity at the treehouse and serving more families and kids as we can, and continuing on the journey of the Inspired Treehouse. There's always something new to add, always new ideas we have for blog posts and new activities. So there's no end in sight as far as that
Nice.
goes. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's definitely, your website is definitely the one-stop shop. So
oh,
for
thanks.
our listeners and our community, please go visit the Inspired Treehouse. Everything is there. They break it down to really easy activities, even if you're looking for that, the gross motor or the heavy work or anything fine motor. The W sit is a big one, right?
Yep.
So all
Yep.
those things, please go check out their website. It's loads of amazing, easy ideas. Thank you so much, Claire, for being here, and I can't wait to share all your ideas with our community. It's been,
Great.
and I look forward to our future together.
I know. This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Giselle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Claire.